Welcome to Discussion Points. Today's topic is, what are the midterm elections this November going to be about? We'll be discussing issues for you to watch in the battle for Congress. Back in the 2024 election, the economy was the number one issue. Looking ahead to the fall, we're hearing about a number of other issues: voter ID, the war in Iran, gas prices, ICE. Will those be decisive in voter priorities? I'm Myra Miller, co-founder of the Winston Group, a strategy and survey research firm in Washington, D.C. I'm joined today by David Winston, president of the Winston Group and weekly columnist for Row Hall. So let's get started. David, tell us, what's going to be the number one issue driving the midterm elections?
Well, I don't think this is going to be any surprise. It's going to be the economy, inflation, cost of living. Those are the dynamics that are driving things. And the reason for that is if you look back at the 2024 election, that's what won the Republicans the trifecta, was because the electorate was so fed up with inflation. And their key focus was how to fix the Biden economy. And so, like I said, Republicans won the trifecta. And what that means is Republicans won the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And what the electorate is looking for is not just simply improving the economy, but they want the Biden economy fixed.
You were talking about the Republican trifecta from 2024. It was clearly a win for Republicans, and President
Yeah.
Trump won the
Yes.
popular vote. But it was still a close election, with the margin at the presidential level being about 1.47%. So still a close election. So that means Republicans are on the line to deliver on what they promised.
And taking it a step further in terms of looking at the House, also a very close result. Republicans won only 220 seats, given the fact that a majority is 218. And so you've got, this incredibly small buffer. We've watched Speaker Mike Johnson just try to pull together 218 votes on a pretty consistent basis.
Well, so tell us about the progress on the economy. How are Republicans doing? And you talk about the Biden economy, the cumulative inflation over that 4-year period was over 21%. So that means there's a real hangover effect that people are still carrying in those price increases. And it's even higher in household expenses like food and electricity. So that's at a very high bar for the Trump administration coming in.
Well, again, you have to look at it from the point of view. There are two components here that people are dealing with. You have prices and you have wages. And what happened under Biden was that prices surpassed wages over his 4-year term by 5%. That means people in this country, their families, lost 5% of their purchasing power during his tenure. What they're really looking for is the Biden economy to be fixed. Now, Trump has run into another challenging dynamic, and that is because of the Iran conflict and gas prices suddenly shooting back up. Having said that, there are policies that were put into place, the signature piece of legislation coming from President Trump and the Republicans being the big, beautiful bill. But we need to see them actually move the numbers more than they've moved so far.
Well, with that cumulative price increase, it sounds like voters are going to be looking for some very significant progress on the economy. I think it's quite unlikely that Republicans will be able to erase that price increase by November. But the question is that, will voters find the progress to be satisfactory or not?
And the key to that is everybody, and they ask, we both of us get asked this question consistently. Is, okay, so does things have to be in order by August or September or earlier than that? And it's not necessarily this sort of broad-based moment. It's when somebody goes into the grocery store and they're looking at prices and they suddenly feel like, I've just got a better handle on this. That means they feel like they're dealing with the cost of living issue. That hasn't happened yet at a large scale, but that's the moment. So it's really an individual by individual basis. So it could be the day before the election and somebody walks in to buy groceries and decides, well, I'm in pretty decent shape. Well, when they go into the ballot box, they're going to have remembered that moment.
So it really is about the economic progress that has or hasn't been made,
Yes,
which gets to our
absolutely.
next
That's
topic, which is presidential job approval, which is influential in any midterm, certainly this one. Where does that stand for President Trump?
Well, right now he's at Well, let me put it into the context before I tell you the specific number. Presidential job approval is very important because it basically is defining people's reactions to the policies that are being presented by the president. And what you've seen consistently, and well, I'm going to show you some numbers here in terms of working through this.
Do you have a
So,
chart for?
yep, yeah, I've got a chart for you. So just give me 1 second and let me pop it up. Okay. So what you're looking at here, and this is from exit polls, and very quickly for those who don't know exactly what exit polls are, the broadcast networks pool together resources to be able to do a major survey of people as they voted, to ask them exactly how they voted, why they voted, to get better understanding so that night when they're reporting it, they can sort of describe what happened. And this is a big survey. It's about 20,000 people. So, I mean, you're talking
And it
about we're
really
gonna
helps. It really helps provide insight about what drove voting decisions and the issues.
and to your point, there are two levels of that. There's obviously on election night what's going on, and the sample size is large enough that you can look at specific groups. But also, as you well know, it's a great historical data set to really understand what happened. Anyway, let me go and we're about to use it for that purpose. Okay, so what you're looking at here in terms of this chart is the job approval of the president at the time of these elections, 2010, 18, and 22. And in each one of these cases, the sitting president's party lost the House of Representatives. And if you take a look at this, you'll see that this has been pretty consistent in terms of what their job approval was. President Obama, in 2010, when he lost the House, 44% approved, 55% disapproved. For Trump, it was 45-54. For Biden, it was 44-55. You can see that those are pretty consistent numbers across the board. Now, having said that, going back to your original question in terms of where is President Trump at this point, his current job approval in our most recent survey was 37-58. That's obviously in the same category, if not slightly worse, than the three previous presidents'
Okay.
election when they had a job approval that is defined as underwater. Again, real quick definition for that. Underwater simply means when the approved is smaller than the disapproved.
Well,
So,
presidential job approval is definitely a headwind, but I want to go back to seeing that Biden 2022 number, the 44-55. There were the Senate Democratic strategy in that election was able to mitigate the impact of that in particularly Nevada, Cortez Masto, which was an incumbent, Maggie Hass in New Hampshire, Mark Kelly in Arizona. They were able to help insulate their incumbents from an unpopular president by defining what they had done for their states, having a positive ad strategy, and it worked pretty well. So presidential job approval it's a factor, but
yes.
it's something that can be worked around to some degree. Well, turning to our next topic. So President Trump isn't on the ballot, and there are many Republican strategists that we're hearing saying that's a problem, and that their strategy is to try to turn out those voters, the Trump voters from 2024 in November. And if Trump's not on the ballot, how do they do that? What's your take on that strategy?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is he may not be on the ballot, but certainly the policies are, and people are taking into account the things that he's done just as they did with President Biden and President Obama. And so his policies are up for review. And again, we're looking at the economy, and the basic element here is they're looking for one thing. They want to see if, in fact, the Biden economy is fixed. And that's the challenge in front of President Trump and all Republicans. And that's just a benchmark by which their performance is going to be graded by the electorate.
Well, and on the question of President Trump not being on the ballot, well, neither is Kamala Harris. And so I think there needs to be some caution in terms of if the strategy is going to be turning out those
Yeah.
people who voted for Trump in 2024 in November. Well, that was from a matchup with her that is
Yeah.
not there either. So I think there needs to be some caution given to that and making sure that those assumptions are taken into account. So we're also hearing some political pundits these days say that in terms of the question of what is this election all about? That it's about what the candidates and the campaigns talk about, what they make it about. We disagree with that because
Yeah,
we've lived through some election cycles where we've seen candidates reap the unfortunate consequences of not focusing on the issues that voters prioritize. Talk about an example that stands out to you from the past election.
well, no, there's one that really jumps out, and it's an interesting one because of just the scale of it. Okay, so in 2010 election, President Obama, in terms of the course of that, had passed his big stimulus bill to try to get the economy moving, and then he immediately moved on to healthcare. Now, healthcare, by the way, is obviously an incredibly important issue. But by the time the election rolled around in November 2010, we were in the 19th month of 9% or greater unemployment. And as important as healthcare was, that scale of unemployment for that extended period of time was just overwhelming. And the fact that he was so focused on healthcare, people were saying, agreed, that's important, but it's the economy. Look at this. And give you the
They
sense.
didn't feel like the economy was in satisfactory shape to be able to move on to take on
Well,
another major issue like healthcare.
yeah, here's a stunning number for you. 90% of the electorate said the economy was not so good or poor. 90%. Only 9% thought it was excellent or good. And so what happened as a result of that, in the contrast of the two issues, 63% of the country said the economy was the number one issue, and only 18% said healthcare. And so basically, Obama was running on an 18% issue, and Republicans working the phrase "where are the jobs" to sort of define the dynamic in terms of unemployment, were on the 63% side in terms of what voters were uh, most focused on. And that to me is just the best example, 63 to 18. And again, what's interesting about that is the healthcare is clearly a critically important issue. But when you get into an economic situation like we were facing, the economy just takes over.
Well, I'll cite an example that's much more recent from 2024. In that election, Democrats, particularly the Harris campaign, focused on the democracy as one of their top messaging strategies, and that backfired on Democrats for several
Yes,
reasons.
it did.
Because, as we were just talking about, the economy and inflation were clearly the voter priorities that were not satisfactorily resolved. Democrats were defining threats to democracy as President Trump, right-wing extremist groups. But what they also didn't understand was that there could be other interpretations of that they didn't consider. So, for instance, Republicans also agree there were threats to democracy, but for very different reasons. Voter fraud, federal government overreach, and to some degree, the media. So, from the exit polls on the question about is democracy under threat, among those voters who thought it was threatened, President Trump actually won that group by 2.
Yes.
And that message strategy was a complete wash. So Democrats were trying to make this election about democracy when the economy and inflation had not been fully resolved. So that's another example of
And if I can add,
unfortunate consequences for candidates who make it about something else.
and if I make another point in terms of that, I mean, when you've got inflation at the scale it was, to some degree, the Democrats just simply didn't have an answer. And so they were looking for
Yep.
something else to sort of focus on. And when you can't talk about the issue that's driving the election, you're in a pretty weak position.
Well, Hakeem Jeffries has said that it was a mistake for Democrats not to try to find ways to talk about affordability in 2024. Uh, the word that we don't hear very much from Democrats these days is inflation, because it's still very closely associated with everything that happened under President Biden. So now they're all about affordability and cost of living. So they're going to get a second go around this November, and we'll see how that works out for them. So to wrap up this week, this election coming up in November is going to largely be about the economic progress that has or hasn't been made, and to what extent have Trump and Republicans handled that effectively. If Republicans can make a robust case for what they've accomplished on the economy and what more they want to do, then voters may keep them around for the next 2 years. If they choose to focus on other issues, then this election may not go very well for them. On the other hand, if Democrats run a strategy where it's only about opposing President Trump and they don't have an economic case to be made, then they might not get the blue wave landslide that they are hoping for. It might be a trickle instead of the wave. So much more to come on that in the future. We'll be talking about that very soon. That's all we have time for this week. Thanks everyone for joining us. Be sure to check out our website at winstongroup.net for many more resources. We'll be back next week. Stay tuned for more discussion points.